everybody. Welcome to another episode of Well, It Depends. That's the name we're settling on. We're going to stick with it because every question we discuss has many factors we could consider. They're not simple questions to answer. That's what we're trying to do here. My name is Paddy,
And my name is Paweł.
and Pavel, you're going to share, I think, our question for today and where it comes from.
The question comes from us, and you were the person trying to formulate it. I think you are way better.
My theater is exposed. Yeah, okay. So I'm trying to ask this question in a gently sort of provocative way, not to be a clickbait headline generator, but my question is, why is complexity theory important, or why should we think about complexity theory? That's my question.
I guess the answer is okay. You can start with it depends, in a sense that maybe you shouldn't be interested in complexity because you are working in a very simple environment where everything is so predictable that it's just not important to bother your head with complex stuff. I think that there are less and less lines of business that actually operate this way, but I'm sure there are some. Uh, I usually work in software development, and there probably people are going to the other extreme, saying that everything is complex or it's pure chaos, and probably that's also not really true. But we need to know how to work with that complex situation. Very often people talk about complex code base, the type of code base where you have spaghetti code, you try to do something here and you expect something to happen, and something completely different explodes in some random place and you have no idea why. So it's good to know how to work in an environment like this.
Yeah,
And yeah.
I mean, I think the reason for my kind of provocative or slightly provocative question is I feel like complex adaptive contexts are the kind of reason for this kind of way of working that we call agile. Maybe it's not a fashionable word to use anymore, but the reasons for these ways of working to exist in the first place, that it's difficult to have standardized processes. We don't necessarily have best practices available, playbooks that we can just run by, for everything we do, because we're doing things for the first time, or we respond to problems in different ways each time, or yeah, the context is complex. It's adapting. And Scrum, I think, came from that kind of context. A lot of the people who worked on the manifesto, the 17 signatories, they were trying to work in those kinds of contexts. And I guess the reason why I brought it up is I feel like the complexity theory from Dave Snowden is, in my mind, in my experience, not referred to enough, and I wish it was more prevalent in day-to-day kind of conversations. Anytime it comes up in conversations where I've been involved, it captures people's attention. I think people get it, and it's so much more practical and applicable in a wide array of contexts than some of the kind of practices and frameworks that we use perhaps more regularly. So I have a selfish reason for asking this question. I want to maybe promote the theory a little bit.
Yeah. Side story might be, I'm reading this book right now by Robert Sapolsky, and first time I've opened it, it has a chapter that is called Primer on Emergent Complexity.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, all right, I need to see how many times will he reference David Snowden. And do you know what? Snowden is not mentioned even once throughout the whole book, which gave me this awesome like revelation. We live in a software bubble, Paddy.
Right.
But anyway, it's a side note because I think David Snowden is the best known person in our bubble who is working on the complexity. Maybe it makes sense to try and improvise very quickly some introduction to Cynefin. You tell me how to pronounce it. I'm not Welsh, you're not Welsh, but
no, it's the only word I know in Welsh. It means habitat, and the way I pronounce it is Cynefin, like almost like a K-E-R at the beginning, Cynefin. So yeah, I can give it a go, but obviously jump in. It's the way he describes it in one of the early videos on YouTube, which we can share, is that it's a sense-making framework, not a categorization framework. And that's important because it's a way of figuring out where you are, right? Not denoting something after the fact. And the idea of Cynefin is that at any one point, when you're trying to figure out how to deal with something, you will be trying to make sense of a particular situation. If you can figure out where the problem lies in one of four areas, that there will be a kind of an approach that makes sense in that context. So let me name the four areas, and we'll see if we can get the language right, because the language associated with Cynefin evolves as well. So mine may be a little out of date here. I haven't necessarily done my homework last night, right?
But I'm just smiling because Snowden is very active blogger, and I think that's what enables him to keep changing this stuff very quickly. Like, I'm very curious. So, what is the first domain? Clear, obvious,
simple,
or simple?
Yeah. Okay. Let all I think get it across, right? Let's say we both maybe need to do our homework, but I'm going to say
right now it's clear. Right
clear.
now it's called clear, I think.
Okay, you've done your homework. I have. You've again exposed my theater. But the idea of clear and simple is this is the domain of best practices, right? This is everything is pretty straightforward, repetitive. You know, the idea of a factory making the same thing over and over again. We have playbooks, we have best practices. We just do it again and again and get better at it. So if you're in the simple area, happy days. Like the strategy is, you know, get better at what you're doing. But things get a bit trickier when we move into the next two. And I've heard Dave Snowden say that Scrum teams tend to work in one or other of the next two zones. So at times the work is complicated, and at times the work is complex. And the strategy available in each of these zones, or the best strategy available in each of these zones, is not necessarily to go with best practices. It's to evaluate, test the system, right? Sense and respond. So, for example, if a customer comes to us and doesn't quite know what it is that they need from us because they don't quite fully understand our complex product, and we then negotiate with them to get something that is perhaps relatively new or perhaps relatively customized for them, right? That's the kind of conversation that brings us into a complicated or a complex domain, because that results in a pull into our system for work to be done perhaps the first time, or a variation of something for the first time. And that's when we're in perhaps complex or complicated.
Yeah. I think it makes sense to at least give not definition, but complicated and complex. For example, in Polish language, which is my native language, there is no difference. So you can only talk about Cynefin in English, I guess, because there's a complicated and complex. And the complicated is the one where you can have some, like you can do sense, analyze, respond. And the complex is where you do probe, sense, respond. Yeah. So in complex, it makes more sense to run some experiment, figure out what happened, and based on that, figure out what decisions do you need to make. And complicated, I think very useful for me reflection was that in complicated, you can still have experts who are there to try to figure things out. So it's not that simple, but if you get enough brain power into the room, they will figure out the right way of doing things. And in complex, there is no clear relationship, cause and effect, for example. So it's like spending more time analyzing things is not right way to handle it.
But I guess that calls back to the reason for things like discovery activities, research, user research, market research. Why do we do these things in the first place? It's because experts don't have all the answers. Right? We have to go out and ask questions to learn more. We have to maybe try things to learn more. That's why there's so many businesses out there, making a success out of things like research techniques or things like A/B testing. We might have a sense that it's better to have the path to check out this way, but why not experiment? Why not try two different approaches and see which one works best? So this kind of brings me to my the fourth zone, which is chaos. And chaos it's very dramatically named, I think, but I think appropriately so, because if a system is mismanaged, or if there are enough things that are not working well in a system, you can be in a chaotic space. And the way that Snowden highlights this is with a little sort of cliff on the diagram from the simple domain into the chaotic domain. And my reflection on that, this is my own reflection over time from sort of just living with, I suppose, this theory for a long time. It comes from how we handle a particular situation if we assume incorrectly that we are in a simple zone. And I think this speaks to so much of kind of bad agile or mismanaged, misused agile approaches. If we think that there's a standard practice that can apply in complex adaptive teams, and we work with teams that way, we risk creating a chaotic situation where what's actually happening in reality, I'm going to say theater again, right? What's actually happening in reality isn't really what management or what is being filtered back. And there's a disconnect, right? So this is something as well that Maarten Dalmijn spoke to in his recent book about sprint goals. He's actually got the first couple of chapters are all about complexity and this idea that it's that we're kind of oversimplifying complex things and creating chaotic contexts as a result, and that as product people or agile people or developers or whoever we are, we all kind of have this responsibility to help educate the people we're working with on this complexity theory idea, because the approaches that are being used aren't appropriate for the context that we're in. And I think, to me, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to ask this question today. How does that resonate?
I'm thinking that you are still missing the fifth domain, or is it domain context? I think domain.
Oh, the zone of, what is it called?
Confusion in the middle. So that's the place where you spend most of the time.
Yeah.
It's when you don't know where you are,
Yeah.
and everyone argues what should be the next step. Yeah.
Come here.
I
Did Snowden come up with known unknowns? Was that his idea?
No, I don't think so.
Oh,
I don't think so, but
that's my zone of uncertainty there, asking that question.
yeah, I'm actually not sure. I think I read an article where the original author was referenced, and it
Okay.
wasn't Snowden, but that was internet, so maybe someone referenced someone, and it's like one of those quotes. Uh, yeah, uh, I think so. Cynefin was the way for me many years ago to get to know David Snowden's work. When like 1 year ago or something like that, I heard him speaking about complexity. He referenced a few other things, and I came up with an idea. All right, what is new? And I visited his wiki page, and he developed his theories a lot. Like there's a
Hmm.
lot of new stuff, and there's a lot to investigate if someone is actually even interested more deeply than the 10 or so minutes we spent talking about it. Um, there's a sense maker that they offer as a tool also. There's the estuarine mapping that is something that yeah, it's the way I used it in practice. It was like a 2-day workshop where you try to figure out your environment, let's say, and there's a lot of new language involved. Like maybe that's one of the reasons maybe why David Snowden's ideas are not that popular. I think he wrote one HBR article that that is written in a bit different language than what he usually does for his blog posts, and sometimes they are quite dense in a
Hmm.
sense. It's not, he's referencing a lot of other concepts that once you get used to it, you know what that means. It's, you get, uh, yeah, it goes faster. But at the very beginning, it's like you read a sentence and then for non-English speaker, oh my God, I didn't understand 3 words. I need to check them. And it's like some concept that just explodes and
Yeah.
it, yeah.
Yeah, I always enjoy his talks whenever they're at, conferences or events, but I find you need some time to recover from them because they're just so full of ideas and like every sentence, and he also speaks a certain way. Every sentence is just so loaded, so full of ideas that it takes some time to settle. But I think the framework, the sense-making framework itself is, I suppose, deceptively simple in theory. And that's why I think it's one of the ideas that I think since the first time I used it, since the first time I saw it, it's just stayed in my kind of way of thinking about, well, what is it we're trying to do here? How straightforward is the thing that we're faced with? How often have we seen this before? Do we have a way of working with things like this? These questions help. Like they might sound basic, but they come from that Carnevin way of thinking. Like, how do we make sense of where we are right now? Like, for example, my little light behind me here. I didn't charge it, right? So that's in the simple domain. There is a best practice there for that. Charge the light, right? It's not complex. So that's some learning for me for next time.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's a huge topic,
Mm.
and probably it would deserve some separate episode related to some specific aspect of it. And I'm wondering if we are done with answering on some basic level the original
Yeah.
question.
So for me, I guess I'm happy we're talking about it because it's it's part of the fundamentals, I think, for so many people who work in software development to understand this because as teams, I as a developer in a team, I often had this sense that we were being managed in this way. Like it's not that simple would be something that you would hear a lot in a team, and that's language straight from Cynefin, right? Or my favorite sort of sentence that would sometimes be said to me as a developer, I don't understand why it's so complicated, you know? And you would say, I know, that's the problem I'm trying to explain to you as well, you know? You know, I know you don't, and like, let's have a conversation about it. Rather than, I don't understand why it's so complicated being a hammer to beat somebody with, you know? That's quite dramatic language now, but you know what I mean. I don't understand why it's so complicated. Should be a humble inquiry, you know,
Yeah.
if you're coming from a Cynefin sort of perspective. Please help me understand, you know. That's that would be a lovely way for a software development team to be managed, you know.
All right. For recommendations, there is a very nice overview of Cynefin from David Snowden himself. So probably that's one thing. Another thing is he writes a lot about managing complexity, constraints management, and yeah, a lot of different topics. So maybe referencing one or two articles would be nice.
Yeah, and I'll recommend Maarten Dalmijn's book on sprint goals, because I think the first sort of few chapters there really gets it across, and it's the best, I think, explanation of Cynefin in kind of natural language and in application that I know of, you know. So if you're a reader, that's a good one. I like Dave Snowden has a YouTube video from about 9, 10, maybe even more, God, 10, 15 years ago, introducing the framework in 5 minutes. I use that a lot. That's another thing I'd recommend.
And there's this HBR article that I think to some extent made the idea even more popular.
Great. Yeah, I haven't read that, so I'll be interested in that one.
It's written in a very nice, easy to understand language.
Works for me.